Hello and welcome to the debut episode of the Season Gaming Podcast. This is the SG BitCast. I'm going to be your host, Ainsley Bowden. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Bert Sines. Today, we're going to be covering some of the popular news across the industry, what we think of the games that are out now and that we're currently playing. Our main topic tonight is going to be E3 2017, looking at some of the conferences and what we think each are going to entail. And then we'll close out with just a few housekeeping items. So the big topic in the news this week, of course, was the Destiny 2 live event reveal. It's the first look we've gotten at Destiny to see the gameplay and what changes Bungie's planning on making with the new installment. And Bert covered that for our site. So Bert, I know you were watching the live event reveal and you took some good notes, kind of had some feedback on that. So what are your thoughts on what you saw?
Yeah, so first opinions. It looks really good from a gameplay standpoint. It's once again, we're looking at a game that's in the middle of a generation. We're not in a new generation console, and the graphics do look like a massive improvement. So we're not looking at something that looks overly amazing or anything along those lines. But from gameplay and from the earliest things, everything looks really good. Online options appear to be improved a little bit from what we saw last time. There's no new massive features that we're seeing from a gameplay perspective online. They seem to be really pushing the community effect where they want to have more things with the community and be able to get people together in clans, and they're offering clan support. So their vision looks really cool. It's cool to see Bungie kind of coming back from where they left off on Halo and not having the big missteps that they had at the beginning of Destiny 1. So from what I've seen so far, it looks really good.
Yeah, I was traveling this week, as you know, but as I got back and had a chance to check everything out, I liked what I saw somewhat, but I also had some reservations around some of the information that's come out about it. So, Bungie has since confirmed that the frame rate, even on PS4 Pro and potentially Scorpio, is going to be capped at 30 frames per second, and that they're still going to use peer-to-peer server matchmaking, if you will, for multiplayer. So that's a pretty big concern for a lot of players, it seems, right now, and I know they're getting a lot of feedback on it. So I don't know why they didn't plan better, if you will. They did say that it's going to be an uncapped frame rate on PC, which seems kind of baffling. That all the other big shooters right now, whether it's Halo, Gears, Overwatch, Battlefield, Call of Duty, basically every competitive multiplayer shooter is at 60 frames per second now. So it seems kind of strange that Bungie would make that decision. I don't know your thoughts on that, or if you think it's a big concern.
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to be a big concern for the Destiny crowd. I think they're going to soak it in for whatever it is. Unfortunately, I think the Sony side of things is unfortunately what's capping the 30 frames per second and the online nature of the game. As we've seen, it appears that Bungie intentionally stayed away from making a deal with Microsoft and having a Microsoft Windows game and having it supported that way, and they intentionally went with Battle.net instead of going with Windows. So with the Pro not having the same power as the Scorpio, I feel that we're going to be limited for that exact reason, because as we have a lot of first-party games from Microsoft, you do have the cross-save feature. You can literally leave off one and come on to your other console, and that picks up right where you left off. But with it being connected to Sony, I think we're kind of held back for that reason alone, which is unfortunate. But as we remember, Destiny 1 had some very rabid fans, and they still are playing hundreds and hundreds of hours. So I think when we get the Destiny 2 launch, I think they're going to not really care about it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think you're right. The hardcore audience or the core Destiny audience, that's not going to be a big factor. It's going to be more about the content, the world building. And I think from that perspective, it looked like Bungie was making some strides. I believe they said that the largest planet that is going to be in the game is the largest game space they've ever created. So that was good to hear. They also said that, they mentioned the word loot a few times. Loot was a big concern early on with Destiny, and it apparently got better over time. I believe you and I both put a few hundred hours into Destiny early on, but we kind of dropped off after those first initial expansions and never really came back to it. So I know for me, one of the things I saw in the video, and maybe this is just me being the kind of ARPG or loot-driven gamer that I am, but I noticed that in some of the multiplayer gameplay, it showed the guns that players were using. And again, it showed them in a context when they were being highlighted of having a base damage value, and then, potentially being upgraded just like in Destiny 1. And frankly, in my opinion, it's just not a good system, because what it means is that if I find a gun named, the Executor, and you find that gun, and 10 million other people find that gun, it's always the same exact statistics. And the core of any good role-playing game or ARPG with loot, in my opinion, is that ability to find variations on a gun. And when you find a better example of that gun, you really get you excited and want you to keep hunting and hunting. The whole like finding a standard gun and then having to upgrade it through farming is just not, it doesn't do it for me personally. I know like you already commented on, millions of people love it. But for me personally, it's not really intriguing. So I have some reservations still, even with the gameplay looking pretty solid.
Yeah, and really quick on that, and then we can move on to the other thing with, aside from Destiny, the big news is, if you remember from Destiny 1 launched, and where it ended is two completely different games. So one of the things that will actually affect in the positive nature with what Bungie does is they'll release their game, and they'll take a lot of fan feedback, whether it be positive or negative, and then make the changes that will get that back to a complete positive. Now, they still left some of the negative that was left there, but from what I understand, Destiny 1 and where they ended is actually really cool now, and some of the DLC that they added made things a lot more positive. The negative side of that is for the people that put in over 100, 200, 300 hours like we did when the game first came out, don't really want to start over from where they left off. Not solely in the game stuff that you were talking about for multiplayer stuff, but I think they're experimenting very highly on their social stuff. I'm not quite sure if the clan thing is going to take off as much as they think they are. And I'm also not too sure if their guided game system that they really pushed at this announcement is really going to work as well. For people that aren't too sure on that, that's the system where someone that is surfing around by themselves and they're wanting to join a clan, and whatever, whether it be multiplayer with Crucible, or if they're wanting to do a raid, they can easily be left or join another clan, vice versa, if the clan's looking for someone by themselves. There's a lot of positives to that, but there's also some negatives, and we won't spend too much time on that. But I think they're experimenting a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if the game releases in September, and then we see a completely different game by even 2018 summer. So Destiny is kind of known for that. Let's see if it actually triggers the way we're hoping it does.
Yeah, good point. Good point. We'll see, I guess. So another interesting piece of news that just came out today actually was that Platinum Games has announced that they're working on a new IP, and that this new IP they're working on, they're going to own the rights to. So Platinum's been making some headlines recently between the whole Scalebound fallout with Microsoft and Nier Automata coming out on the PS4 and being a more of a niche game, but gaining popularity due to good reviews and some really good fan feedback. So, Platinum having gotten popular more recently for Bayonetta, which I know you were a big fan of, Bert. What do you think about this?
Yeah, Bayonetta 1 and 2 are some of my favorite games from last, and I guess technically this generation, if you consider the Wii U this generation, but not really. And we have some really close friends that love Nier Automata. They've already said it's their game for 2017. So I think it's really cool. I hope it does. And I have heard rumblings that Scalebound is not 100% dead. So we'll see what that actually turns into. So good news from Platinum.
Yeah, that's an interesting point I wasn't even going to comment on, but you brought it up. So good point there is that Microsoft did confirm that they kind of renewed the rights to the Scalebound license, or IP, if you will. But apparently it's not an active development. So whether or not Microsoft brings that back in the future, we'll see. I know there was a decent sized group of people that were looking forward to it, but we'll see. So speaking of Microsoft and their IPs, Minecraft, which we seem to somehow touch on every time we discuss games in general, they did come out and confirm that the Windows 10 version, so that is the new build of Minecraft, not the traditional Java version that most of the server games are built on today, but the Windows 10 version will be cross-play with Microsoft One later this year, and on Scorpio it'll be a 4K version of that title. So, Minecraft's popularity endures. It'll be the first time that the console players and PC players, at least to some degree, can play on the same server. So this is pretty big news for some players.
Yeah, with Microsoft, I shouldn't say Microsoft, with Nintendo just releasing Minecraft on the Switch, it's still shocking to me how many units that game has sold. I think the closest competitor to everything that's selling as many units is Grand Theft Auto 5. So Minecraft just continues to boggle me at how many people buying it. And I'm sure that when this comes out, it's going to sell like crazy too. So awesome news.
Yeah, your point about Grand Theft Auto 5, I believe, if I recall correctly, it was either 60 million units for Grand Theft Auto 5 now, and Minecraft, even 2 months ago, was confirmed to have passed 120 million. So it's shocking. I mean, I know just in my household alone, I think we own 6 or 7 copies of Minecraft just on different platforms. So it's amazing. Excuse me. Um, Another big piece of news out of BioWare. So BioWare Austin, the team responsible for the original Mass Effect trilogy, has been working on a new IP, which has simply been referred to as Destiny-like. So presumably some type of large world co-op shooter. And this was a game that EA originally said was going to come out in their 2018 fiscal year, which means it would have released before March 31st of 2018. So Wilson, the CEO of Electronic Arts, in one of their financial calls last week or 2 weeks ago, mentioned that this has now been delayed. So the game probably, in all likelihood, won't release until end of next year or fall of next year. But this is some big news and something that is supposedly going to be a very large title for Electronic Arts.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with a lot of BioWare's changes. I think there's been some positive stuff from BioWare this year, but also a lot of negative with Mass Effect. So with all their changes and everything, I'd be interested to see what actually comes from this title. It's kind of unfortunate that we're getting another delayed title, but whatever needs to happen for it to be a better title, I'm okay with.
Yeah, and I have to wonder you always wonder, right, inside the industry if Destiny 2 had something to do with that. If this is a Destiny 2 like game or, something in that vein, and Destiny's coming out September 8th and is going to be a huge bombshell of a release later this year. You have to wonder if Electronic Arts and BioWare thought twice about releasing in that same time frame, to see if their game might have just gotten overlooked. So who knows?
Yeah, on the topic of EA, they released some interesting news this week regarding digital sales. And they've mentioned that digital sales should be up to 40% of all sales that are coming out. So for the collecting crowd and the people that like those hard copies, they're kind of going away little by little, but thankfully it's only at 40% right now. So get your hands on as many pieces of software as you can while there's still hard copies out there.
Yeah, I think so. I think you and I are starting to become the minority, right? I know we both prefer hard copies. That may speak to either our age or just the fact that we're both collectors of these types of things. But overall, digital sales just continue to increase. We've seen the news out of GameStop, who's one of the largest sellers of physical copies, just continuing to decline. And in fact, the 40% figure was console sales. So we know, based on some recent statistics as well, that over 70% of PC game sales are now digital as well. And that, of course, is probably due to Steam. But this is a number that's just going to keep climbing. But as you said, people like us will just continue to collect those hard copies. So.
Yeah, I can't remember seeing a PC hard box game anywhere. Now I come to think about it, I figured it'd be higher than 70. With services like Battle.net and Steam, I think it's almost too easy to go just digital on PC. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point too. I wonder where that 30% does lie. But so continuing with Electronic Arts, another bombshell of a release later this year, of course, will be Star Wars Battlefront 2. And Battlefront 1, despite being commented on by many as being a rather bare bones release, it kind of capitalized on the Star Wars license and the Force Awakens coming back out, and later this year we have the Last Jedi, and they're obviously going to capitalize on that with Battlefront 2. But this game looks to be much larger in scale. So it actually has a canon-based single-player campaign, which is going to take place right after Return of the Jedi. And you're going to play the side of an Empire squad, which will be really interesting to see how they write that. So in addition to that, it's going to have large-scale multiplayer again, and they're also adding back the space battles as well, 24-player space battles. So this is a huge development for Electronic Arts. They have 3 different studios working on this, between multiplayer, the space battles, and the single player campaign. So it's just nice to hear that this should be one that's just loaded with content and ready to go right at release, rather than taking months to kind of fill up.
Yeah, and on that news article, the thing I heard, it was 3 times the size of Battlefield 1. So as we can remember, Battlefront, when that released, it was exactly as you said, very bare bones. There was only a few maps. There was no campaign. And it seems like they've really listened to the fans on this one. And even more just seeing that the cover art, you kind of see so many different time frames from the Star Wars canon that really looks like it's going to do really well. So I hope it actually comes out, like you said, ready to launch with tons of stuff.
Yeah, and I'll be there day one. Based on what I've seen already, I'm pretty excited about it. So it's neat. Lastly, this really can't be considered news, but I can't help but mention it because this is by far and away my most anticipated title of the year, and that is Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption is one of my all-time favorites. Rockstar, as we've kind of seen over the years, is very, very good about keeping news tight to the chest, if you will. Things don't really leak out too much from them. So whether or not we'll see them at E3 on someone's stage, we'll see. But right now, a kind of small rumor came out that Red Dead Redemption 2 potentially will be releasing on September 15th, which would be, 1 week after Destiny releases. So we don't know if it's true. The guy who initially leaked it has kind of walked back a little bit. For what reason, we don't know. But if that's true, then watch out, because that's going to be by far one of the largest releases of the fall. Talk real quick about some of the developer news that came out, and going back to kind of BioWare and Battlefront 2 and Mass Effect Andromeda and all the news that circled that game. So BioWare Montreal, who was the core developer of Mass Effect Andromeda, has now been, some of their development team has now been moved over to Motive, which is one of the 3 companies working on Battlefront 2. So those development resources have been moved over to help finish that game up. And EA announced that Mass Effect new development, has been put on hold for the time being. So we all know the kind of circus, if you will, that occurred after Mass Effect Andromeda released. And it'll be really interesting over the next few years to see how BioWare and EA handle the Mass Effect license. Do they try to continue down the Andromeda path, or do they just kind of let it sit for a few years dormant and then come back with something different or new later? So we're not sure, but we do know for right now there's no new Mass Effect development ongoing.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. For people that know my games, Mass Effect Trilogy was one of my favorite games from the 360 and PS3 era. And the sad part of that whole thing is with Andromeda is I wonder what that means for DLC for the game. If we remember Mass Effect 2 and 3, they had some awesome DLC that expanded more on characters and some really cool missions that even made the main mission make more sense to people that got lost. So I hope we still get something from there. Doesn't sound like it, though, so I'll be curious to see who's been working on the DLC, if anybody has.
Yeah, for sure. Another piece of kind of interesting developer news. So IO Interactive, which were the developers of the newest Hitman, the episodic Hitman, were dropped by Square Enix, their kind of publishing partner, if you will. So the rumor on this one is that IO Interactive has retained the Hitman rights, or the rights to the IP. I haven't seen any official confirmation of that. But another interesting situation, that's one of those where it apparently sold over 3 million copies, 3.5 if I remember correctly. So it's kind of baffling that, Square Enix just kind of did away with them. So, whether Microsoft, Sony, or some other big publisher picks up IO Interactive to continue the series is we'll see.
Yeah, and that's a super shame. If you haven't played the new Hitman series, the episodic one, it's actually really good. And I know a lot of people that put that in their backlog. It wasn't a big release for them. They weren't huge Hitman lovers in the past, but then they gave it a try and they love it. I've played the first 3 episodes from it, had a great time, and there's so many different ways you can kind of attack the mission. So I've had a really good time on it. And it's really a shame that that many units sold is considered kind of not necessarily a failure, but not meeting the expectations of the the parent company. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure who it was, but they looked at Tomb Raider not too long ago, and they found that to be kind of not to meet expectations, despite selling over 4 million units. So.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It was Tomb Raider and it was Square Enix. And again, you have to wonder, with the market being so large and so many games fighting for people's attention, when 3 and 4 million units is looked at as non-successful, that really doesn't make any sense to me. But hey, I'm not part of Square Enix or their accounting team. So some of the new games that have released over the past week or two. So you briefly commented on Minecraft for the Switch. Um, was there anything further kind of on that one that you wanted to discuss? I mean, I know the Switch's library, if you will, has kind of been a slow burn. So something like Minecraft coming to it, especially as portable as the Switch is, I know was looked at as kind of an important release.
Yeah, so I do have a couple things on Minecraft Switch, and it is the performance of Minecraft Switch on the Switch. And it's the fact that it plays really, really well. Digital Foundry recently did a few comparisons between that and PS4 and PS4 Pro. And Switch actually runs really well as far as frames per second and clarity goes. There has been a few different glitches that I wouldn't say glitches, but I should say shortfalls because of the Switch hardware that actually, when you're looking at draw distance as far as the scenery goes and landscaping, it does have a little bit of texture pop in that's unfortunate. However, one of the neat things that's available with the Switch is you can take it off the dock and actually play four-player split screen on the tiny little 6-inch screen, which is cool, I guess, if you're looking at that. Probably not for everybody, but for people that love Minecraft and you can play four-player split screen on the go, it's fantastic. So people super excited about that one, and I know it's already selling really well. So that's good news for them.
Minecraft selling well, the go figure. But no, when you mentioned the four-player split screen on the small Switch screen, the 6-inch, it immediately gave me flashbacks of GoldenEye and Mario Kart on the 17-inch old CRT TVs. So, nowadays that's a long distant memory, but it is a really neat feature, as you said. So another new release was the Surge, and that is we're kind of running out of phrases to use for these types of games. So Souls-like seems to be the popular phrase, but it's a sci-fi Souls-like game, if I recall correctly, Bert.
Yeah, that's correct. The Surge is already being seen in exactly what you said. I think there needs to be an official name for the gameplay styles. It's immediately said as a Dark Souls clone, but with the sci-fi kind of. I think the comparison a lot of people are using is what Ripley used at the end of Aliens, in her suit there, her exosuit. Really positive review scores. It's scoring pretty high on Metacritic. Everybody's liking it. What I'm worried about is that the game is going to kind of get shuffled into the mix of a number of AAA software that's been releasing already in 2017. Here comes E3. A lot of new games will take the steam from that. And then with Scorpio coming and other surprise releases, I hope people don't forget about the Surge, because from what I've seen, it looks really good and it's getting really good feedback from everybody. So hopefully it actually sells pretty well.
Yeah, it's a shame, really. I mean, this first quarter, and now we're into the second quarter, of course, has just been phenomenal, right? So games like The Surge that are not a tried and true IP, it's a new IP from a smaller developer, they very quickly get overlooked. But you're right. I mean, feedback's been really positive on the game. I love the Souls games. I love sci-fi, so you would think this would be one I would immediately go for. And the only reason I haven't is exactly what you said. It's just that I've already got, 10 to 12 games that I'm working through right now, and it's just there's no time for it. So hopefully I do get time later this year to at least check it out.
Yeah, a really quick note on the Surge too is if people are kind of unaware of who the developer is, these are the guys that worked on Lords of the Fallen. So if you enjoyed that game, which was kind of a surprise for a lot of people, they intentionally kind of targeted the Souls games and try to bring out a whole new series and IP. It wasn't perfect, but a lot of people enjoyed it. But the Surge is supposed to be kind of what they've learned from Lords of the Fallen and now where we are today. So that's kind of a big thing for people to keep in mind.
Excellent. So Farpoint released, and Farpoint is a PSVR title, something we don't talk about too often, but it is a significant title because it's one that Sony had been previewing or really kind of putting out there as a key title for PSVR, and they even created a new peripheral that comes with the title, kind of like a gun that you can use, a gun-shaped move controller, if you will. So this is, it's a sci-fi title, sci-fi shooter, and it's one that I believe, if you're an owner of PSVR, it's actually one of the few pieces of hardware, or one piece of hardware that I don't own right now. But if you have a PSVR and you're looking for something new to play in that, because it's been, again, a little slow burn since the beginning of the year on PSVR, this is supposed to be one of the larger titles that Sony has kind of put their weight behind, if you will. So, it could be enjoyable. And then the big title that, of course, Bert and I both want to talk about is Injustice 2. So Injustice 2 released earlier this week. The reviews have been amazing, really, really high overall. I was traveling early in the week, but I just got back and got started into it yesterday or Thursday, and I'm already just head over heels with it. I love it. It's fantastic. It's deep. A ton of different modes. The character selection is fantastic. The story mode was well written. You know, played out like a great comic book story, and you, again, left it open for a continuation there. So, Bert, I know you've been playing it even more than me. So, and you're a big DC fan. What are your thoughts on it?
Wow, the game is very addictive. And if you've played any of the NetherRealm games before, and the recent releases have been just fantastic from Mortal Kombat and even Injustice 1. That's correct. I'm a big DC fan. And when you play the story, you can really see that NetherRealm is too. A lot of Easter eggs hidden all over the place. They're extremely loyal to subject material. And if you've kept up with any of the comic books that have been released outside of the game, it's really cool to kind of see where they're leading everything to even now. I mean, just keep in mind the series is not over and it's still moving, so a lot of cool things. And I've had a blast with it. We went online with it last night, and it was just great to do it on a King of the Hill standpoint. The guild building where you can play together with your friends and earn things together is a lot of fun too. And as I said at the beginning, it's been addictive to the point that I'm looking for all kinds of gear. I'm trying to soup up my characters and have them look different, and it's great.
Yeah, I've loved it so far. It's probably, I mean, I'm still early, so this is going to be a bold statement, I realize. But from a depth standpoint, just from the amount of game modes and options, ways you can play, ways you can connect with people, I'd venture to say it's probably the deepest fighting game of all time. Like I said, not from a fighting mechanic standpoint, possibly, but merely from the ways in which you can play it. And one of the things I want to give a shout out to NetherRealm as well. You mentioned they've just been NetherRealm's been killing it, right? I mean, MK9, Injustice, MK10 or MKX, and Injustice 2 have all been fantastic games, and they just continue to evolve and get better. But on this one, I even want to give them a shout out to just the sheer amount of customization options in the game. For instance, it supports HDR, it supports home theater sound options, it supports things like putting a small input delay even when you're playing offline, so that when you compete online, you're kind of attuned to how that feels, because for anyone who plays fighting games, the difference between offline and online is usually noticeable. So those types of features are just amazing. There's full ping counters and kind of network tracking for anyone you're playing against, so you can pick a room that's either closer to you and has a better connection, so you don't experience any lag online. Fantastic. They really support the fighting community as a company should, and they deserve praise for that.
Yeah, something else that's kind of important to the whole thing is the fact that you don't have to go online to enjoy the game. With so many games these days, you have to go online to kind of get the most out of the game. Well, there's things like new features that they've added, which is similar to, I guess, the ladder system and kind of where you'd go through graveyards in Mortal Kombat, but they added what's called the multiverse. And you don't even need to go online for that. And there's hours and hours and hours of gameplay for that. You can do private matches. You can even send your setup of 3 fighters to do kind of AI simulation with other AIs that other people have set up. I've heard of people that haven't even touched online yet, and they're doing tons of challenges with their guilds that are kind of earning things. So that's something else that should be kind of praised, in the sense to where they've released a game that has so much ability to be played single player and multiplayer, and there's still so much more from it.
Yeah, so a massive amount of content, innovation in the gear system, innovation in the modes like the multiverse you said, and guess what? It all works on day one. Which is not something we get to say too often nowadays. But
Not at
as
all.
you mentioned, you and I went online last night, played King of the Hill, had a ball, got our butts kicked intermittently, but we'll get back to it. And it's great. So props to NetherRealm, props to one of our favorite guys in the industry, Ed Boon. Always great to see him doing well with his studio. So I know Injustice has been your core focus. Are there any other recent releases you've been playing?
Yeah, so recent releases, I did mention Hitman earlier. I did kind of come back to that game, and I unfortunately made the mistake of waiting so long to play it. That's been a lot of fun for me. Something else is, with all the Darksiders news that's been happening, I've actually come back to playing the remastered versions of the Darksiders 1 and 2. And I just recently picked up the Darksiders remastered for PS4. And I'm looking forward to playing the first one and then finishing the second one with Death. And kind of coming back to that and getting kind of in tune with the story before the new game releases, even though it's still a ways away. So a little bit of nostalgia for me there. That's one of my favorite games of last generation. Is kind of the Zelda replacement for me. And I love kind of that story standpoint where you're kind of dealing with the Four Horsemen and what's going on in hell and all things like that. So it's been kind of cool. I'm looking forward to getting through that one again in a remaster standpoint. How about you?
Nice. So outside of Injustice now, I'm still playing Prey. I think I'm nearing the end there. I've kind of told people that this is so far could be my game of the year so far in 2017. I really, really enjoy it. It takes everything that System Shock and BioShock did well for the most part, and even does some things better. I'm not sure that Rapture and that whole environment of BioShock 1 will ever be touched at this point. It's been 10 years, and in my opinion, no one's touched it yet. But Talos 1, which is the space station you're on in Prey, is really, really cool. The race that you're fighting against, and I won't get into any spoilers here, but that's really neat, and just so many things the game does right. I love it. The atmosphere, the soundtrack, the creepiness of it, and the ways you can complete objectives in various ways is just fantastic. So I'm going to be writing a review on that. I've kind of started it, but I hope to have that up in the next couple days here. But yeah, I'm just loving that. So I'm looking forward to finishing that and then just continuing to play the hell out of Injustice. So.
Yeah, Prey and Nier Automata are kind of like my next games that I'm going to be working on. So I look forward to kind of getting to those. And I've heard so much good stuff about Prey. So I can't wait to get my hands on it.
All right. So one of the segments we're going to do intermittently on the show is to talk about collectibles. So both Bert and I collect various things from a video game standpoint, whether it's figures or statues or certain classic games, consoles, etc. And really quickly wanted to touch on one of the new releases for fans out there, and you can actually see it right here next to me. And this is the AC Worldwide Master Chief Bluetooth speaker. So AC Worldwide is a company that started by making replica Bluetooth speakers of famous IPs, and they actually started with Star Wars. So they have a Darth Vader and a Stormtrooper helmet just like this one. And then this is the speaker here, and has a bottom-mounted subwoofer. And really their focus has been sound quality. So even though this is kind of a portable and not massive speaker in that sense, it really they work with the license. So in this instance, AC Worldwide worked directly with 343 on the coloring and the design and the proportions and the lights and everything that go with it. So it's really authentic. But then you can sync up any Bluetooth device with it and, just play it remotely. It's got a full built-in battery that lasts 3 to 4 hours. And the sound quality, I'm a pretty big sound snob, if you will, for lack of a better word. I'll go with audiophile. That may sound better. But it's actually pretty impressive, especially for the size and what it is. It's clear and concise, and it's got a good mix between your kind of highs and lows. So it's retails. It's not cheap. It retails in the $200 to $250 range, depending on where you got it from or when you got it. I luckily got it a little bit cheaper just because I was one of the first to order it. But yeah, it's if you like Star Wars or you really like Halo and you're looking for a Bluetooth speaker that's kind of unique and not your standard just little box that you set up, check it out. Like I said, AC Worldwide, and you can find them online.
Yeah, so how size-wise, how similar is that to the Halo 3 Collector's Edition sizing goes? It looks similar.
Excuse me. Yeah, what's funny about that is I have that sitting in the room right here too, and I should have brought it down, but this is actually larger. So I would say this is about a third larger than the Halo 3 LE helmet. But it is a slightly different kind of angle and coloring. This is more of what they call the Halo 5 Chief versus the Halo 3 Chief. And so the coloring, as you can probably see, is a little bit lighter than that classic kind of deeper green. And that's apparently by design. I actually questioned 343 about that, and they told me it's absolutely by design. So, but yeah, it's a decent size. It's got some weight to it, but it's got you can't see it here, but there's some buttons mounted on the front bottom here. And then once it syncs up with the device, it'll stay synced. So all I would have to do, for instance, is turn on my phone's Bluetooth, and it'll automatically sync up. And it has Master Chief's voice on it when it connects, and the visor lights up and the lights light up. So it's really playing fan service to people like me who are huge, fans of that IP. So like I said, if you're a Halo fan or Star Wars fan, it's something to check out. All right, so quite a few games coming up here in this next week or next 2 weeks, I should say. It's no major releases, if you will, or I don't know. I'll probably offend someone by saying that, but no major releases. But we've got several that I'll just quickly run through. So Disgaea 5 Complete releases for the Switch next week, and that is traditionally a PlayStation title, but again, part of that kind of supplementing the Switch's library with digital titles. Game of the Year version of Overwatch is coming next week to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of the game, and it apparently offers the whole suite to this point, along with some I believe it's 10 loot boxes, if I recall correctly, for a new player to kind of get them going, building their collection. Friday the 13th comes out as well on May 26th, and that's for all platforms as well. That is a title I'm looking forward to, and one that's been in beta for a while now, where one person plays as Jason and the other players in the multiplayer gameplay as the counselors, and their goal is to escape, and Jason has to hunt them down. So that looks like a ton of fun. Rime, May 26th as well, and that's a game that was originally going to be published by Sony. Sony ended up dropping it for reasons unknown, and now that is coming to all platforms. So to the benefit of the players, really. Ultra Street Fighter 2, The Final Challengers, is another interesting digital title for the Switch. Ultra Street Fighter 2 are words I didn't think I would utter together in the past decade or 15 years, but that looks interesting as well. A title called Get Even comes out on May 26th as well. And Get Even it looks almost like Condemned. It's kind of like a murder mystery with some horror elements. So it looks pretty interesting, and that's coming to PS4, Xbox One, and PC as well. And then lastly, on June 2nd is Tekken 7. So that really doesn't need much conversation, right? Tekken's a massive franchise that's coming to all platforms, and so Tekken fans will be anxious to get their hands on that one. Anything out of these upcoming releases, Bert, that kind of you're looking forward to?
Looking forward to Friday the 13th to see what that looks like and plays like. We've seen this been delayed a number of times, and they've done a lot of fine tuning. So I hope it's a lot of fun. And the other one that's going to kind of surprise me is Ultra Street Fighter 2. I'm just curious to see how well that sells. There's been a lot of positive and negative feedback toward it, and I'm curious to see if the Switch crowd picks it up and actually ends up buying it. I'm a big Street Fighter guy, especially from that time when Ultra Street Fighter 2 was around. It's been so long, and they've done a lot of cool things to it. So hopefully it sells well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's going to be interesting because, I mean, I don't know what type of market is still out there for Street Fighter 2. You know what I mean? I guess we'll see. I'm looking forward to Friday the 13th, as I said. I've been watching some of the developer playthroughs of that, and it just looks like a blast. So I'm really hoping that does well and launches well, so that it doesn't have a lot of bugs or issues at launch. And then Get Even actually looks real interesting to me. I'm a massive Condemned fan. One of my favorite horror games of all time, and this looks to be kind of up that alley where you're investigating, but it's seemingly like you don't really know what's going on. It looks really creepy, so I love that kind of stuff. So we'll see how that turns out. All right, so the main topic tonight that we wanted to cover, before we get too close to E3, usually a week or two out from E3, things start to leak, and half of the information that you thought you were going to get at E3 seems to have already been out in the marketplace. So we wanted to kind of get ahead of that and, just kind of take a swing at what we think each of the major conferences is going to hold. So first up is Nintendo. Now, Nintendo is not holding an official E3 press conference. They typically have it in recent years, but they are having a Nintendo Treehouse event, Nintendo Direct event, where they're going to have 3DS and Switch obviously on display. They have confirmed that Super Mario Odyssey is going to be playable, which will be the first time any people players get their hands on it. And, we'll see, obviously, ARMS and Splatoon 2, which are big releases over the summer for the Switch. So it'll be interesting to see, beyond those key titles that we already know of, what else can Switch owners expect over the next 12 months? Because really, that's only 3 major titles, right? And Nintendo has a lot of IPs that are kind of waiting to be resurrected on Switch. So, Bert, you've been playing and buying a lot of Switch software and been following Nintendo pretty closely. What do you think is going to occur here?
Yeah, so I have a feeling that Nintendo is going to be pushing Mario a lot in the advertising side of things. I think we're going to see Mario all over the place. I think they're still going to be pushing their big summer titles that are coming, which are ARMS and Splatoon 2, which would be interesting. And the other big thing that a lot of people are kind of not shrugging off, but not really caring too much about and kind of interested in is the new 2DS XL. That is their new handheld system that is exactly a 3DS XL, but without the 3D feature. And I think Nintendo's banking on that being a pretty high selling item of theirs as far as consoles go. So I'm curious to see if there's going to be tons of those for people to put their hands on, play with. I'm also hoping that we get some Mario gameplay and more details on Mario. As we've mentioned in some articles of ours in the past, that's really doesn't have a firm release date. All we've got from it so far is that it's December 31st, 2017. Most developers usually put that on the calendar. That just means they're aiming to have it done in 2017. But I wouldn't be surprised if it slips to 2018 for whatever reason is. Nintendo's kind of notorious for that, and their massive titles like Zelda, Mario. But we really don't know much about Mario yet, aside from that trailer that they gave us and the fact that it's going to be kind of an open world type game. And I think that's going to be something they're really going to push for, not just Splatoon 2 and ARMS.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the 2DS because I've never owned a 3DS or that console or platform, if you will. But I'm kind of interested. The library is so large at this point in time, and there's so many games to play on it. If this is the final and definitive version of that, then I may pick one up. I never really cared for the 3D feature, so this seems like it's right up my alley. In regards to Mario, that is the core reason that I bought a Switch. I know tons of people are Zelda fans, and the game has gotten praise beyond words, right? So I do enjoy it. I'm having a good time with it, but Mario is really where I'm gonna get my enjoyment out of the Switch. So I can't wait to see it in more detail. As you said, they really haven't committed to a release date yet. So they've said that it's going to be playable, but anything can be playable, right? They could offer one hub world or one level of the game without really committing to anything. So it'd be interesting to see what that turns out to be. And then on ARMS, I've seen a lot more footage on ARMS lately, and they've been doing these kind of character reveals over the past few weeks. That's a really interesting title. I don't know what to expect out of it. I don't know if they're going for the true competitive fighter, like something like Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, Injustice, which we were just talking about, or if this is going to be something more casual that friends can just get together and have a fun time with. So I really don't know what to expect of that. It looks kind of, I don't know. It looks very Nintendo for whatever that, however you take that, but it definitely looks unique, and I don't know the avenue they're really aiming for that.
Yeah, the thing with ARMS that I thought when they initially announced it back in January of 2017, I thought it was more of like a Wii Sports type demo game. It didn't seem that deep to me. It seemed almost kind of like a joke. I was not interested in it whatsoever. And the more I see of it, and the more that Nintendo is spending time advertising, and I'm curious exactly like you are to see if there's more to the game than what we're actually seeing. So I just hope it doesn't come out and it's kind of like a flop. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. All right. So the next major conference, or the first of the major E3 conferences, is Electronic Arts. So Electronic Arts, they've got Battlefront 2, which is an obvious one. They've got all their sports titles. They just debuted last week that Brady's going to be on the cover of Madden 18. And you being a Brady fan, we can probably skip right past that. We don't need to talk about Brady. But obviously there's FIFA and NHL and those titles. I believe they're bringing back NBA Live, this year as well. But they've also mentioned pretty clearly that they're Destiny-like IP, which we kind of touched on earlier, is been delayed, likely until late next year. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if we get to kind of finally get to see the details or hear the details and hopefully see some footage of what that represents, because really Destiny-like could be a number of things. And so I'm kind of curious. I think everyone's curious at this point to see what that game is going to entail and what kind of feature set Electronic Arts has planned for it.
Yeah, my predictions for Electronic Arts are I have a feeling they're going to spend a ton of time on Battlefront. People are going to go crazy about it because it's Star Wars. They're also going to be having probably some enhanced demos for people to go and play, some multiplayer stuff. I think multiplayer is going to surprise people a lot. But exactly what you're mentioning on the game that's being delayed, I'd like to at least have an idea of what was planned or what is coming in the near future. Maybe a tiny little teaser like so many developers do, where they share barely anything, but they just tease what's coming. That'd be really cool to see from EA.
Yeah, and outside of that, I mean, I think you're right. I think they're really going to focus on Battlefront 2. Um, I really don't know what else EA is going to show us. I hope for something new that nobody knows about. There was a small rumor, which seems kind of at odds with the marketing deal they have with Sony, but there was a small rumor that Battlefront 2 would be shown at 4K 60 frames on Scorpio. So I don't know. That would be pretty big news considering how big that release is planned to be later this year. But we'll have to see. I can't really comment or even think of how Electronic Arts could really surprise us um, with anything, with anything that we haven't heard of to this point.
Yeah, and also Microsoft has that EA accessibility through the Microsoft Xbox One. So I'm curious if they'll try to give something extra to those subscribers, or if it's just some Scorpio stuff that we're going to get from it. So I'm curious.
That's a good point too. It'd be interesting to see how they handle Battlefront 2, even with Sony having the marketing rights. So, and that's a good segue. So next up, on moving to Sunday this year for the first time, is Microsoft. So Microsoft's going to move earlier on Sunday afternoon. According to Phil Spencer, they did that because they really wanted to get ahead and kind of be able to take the time they needed to talk about all the things they wanted to talk about, while at the same time, kind of giving them some leeway between when their news comes out and when Sony and Ubisoft and those other major companies come out. Obviously, I mean, obviously they're in direct competition with Sony, so they're trying to give their news some time to get amongst the masses before Sony has a chance to respond, if you will. What do you think we're going to see out of Microsoft? I mean, there's some obvious things, right? But you think, what are your comments on Scorpio and titles around that, and anything kind of secret you think they may be working on?
Well, if I think of Microsoft and E3, all I think is Scorpio, Scorpio, Scorpio. I think so many people are excited to see, number one, what it looks like. Number two, what it looks like when it's running games, and what it's going to do to our existing games and even old backwards compatible games that exist today. There's been a lot of talk of it even affecting those. With that being said, I have a feeling we're going to get a game that's going to surprise a lot of people, that'll be getting some amazing Scorpio support, kind of like Sony does with their pro support on their games. And I think we'll be seeing some Forza stuff. I think the next Forza entry is coming in the near future. And I think we might get a tiny teaser of Master Chief doing something. So, how about you?
Yeah, I think Halo 6 or some form of Halo will be teased in some form. I mean, we'll see, but I can't imagine them going through 2017 E3 without something of that nature. I don't think we'll see anything out of Coalition and Gears. Maybe a snippet of what the year two or the rest of the year means for Gears. 4 to 7 is almost a guarantee, right? When Digital Foundry looked at Scorpio, obviously they used Forza 6 Apex, which is the 4K PC version of Forza, as a demo. So I mean, no doubt in my mind that Forza 7 in 4K 60 with Porsche right out of the gate will be a huge promotion for Scorpio. Games like Shadow of War and some of the larger titles this year, I'm really curious to see what they'll have on stage. There's a rumor that Microsoft's going to have the marketing deals on a major AAA game. The rumor for a while has been Assassin's Creed Origins, but it could be something like Far Cry 5. It could be something else that we don't know. And then, of course, you've got the major first party games that we haven't even touched on, right? So you've got Sea of Thieves, you've got Crackdown 3, and you've got State of Decay 2, all major games that have really kind of taken a back seat in terms of publicity, right? Sea of Thieves is running their alpha insider views, but there's a strict NDA where the people who are in that can't talk about it. And all we keep hearing from Crackdown and State of Decay developers are, come see us at E3, come see us at E3. So I think at this point, Microsoft realizes that they really need to come out in this E3 and just come swinging, right? Scorpio's got to be a hit. People have to like the way it looks. They have to like the price point. And then Microsoft really has to put some focus behind showing these new games and third-party games taking advantage of Scorpio. The one thing that's interesting, though, and I've heard other people talk about this as well, is if you're Microsoft and you're on stage at E3 and you've got millions of people watching around the world, how do you accurately demonstrate the power of Scorpio? and what those games look like compared to competitors um, on that screen. You know, if someone's at home watching on YouTube on their phone, or they're watching on a 13-inch laptop screen that's a 1080p screen, or even a 720p screen, how do you demonstrate that market difference that Microsoft is claiming?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if after E3 and stuff like that, digital foundries or the folks that spend a lot of time on, frames per second resolution, spend more time on it as well. Because to your point, I remember when the PlayStation Pro did some of their stuff, they had nothing but text and a few data points as to what the new processors did and stuff like that. But that went over people's head pretty high, and Pro had kind of a cold welcome, to say the least. And with Microsoft needing to spend a lot of focus on Scorpio and what it can do, and sell even existing PS4 people that have stuck with that console, just based on sales right now, they're going to have to get some of those folks to move over to Microsoft, or at least have both consoles as well. So they're going to have to demonstrate that in some form.
Yeah, I think that I think it's going to be interesting to see. I'm glad I'm not the person that has to figure out those details of how you market Scorpio, because as you said, the Pro hasn't really been lighting the world on fire. And some of the support, some of my frustrations with the support as an owner of the Pro, with like Prey, for instance, Prey is Digital Foundry showed us is no difference between the standard PS4 and the PS4 Pro, and that's disappointing, right? Especially when the PC version runs far superior. So we'll see what Microsoft does in that regard. I think the one thing that is being downplayed, maybe it could be critics, it could be fanboys, what have you, but for people who don't truly understand the specs, there's a lot of publications out there saying it's kind of like the PS4 Pro. It's as a console, when they try to quickly explain what Scorpio is, well, it's like the PS4 Pro. Well, it's not really. It is substantially more powerful than that, and has a lot of unique features in the R&D of that console that really are worth mentioning. And I think it does a disservice to Scorpio and the R&D that Microsoft put into Scorpio for fans and for players to just say, oh, it's just like a PS4 Pro. So I don't know. That could be my own personal opinion, but yeah, I mean, the just what's going on to it is interesting. So I'm anxious to see it. I'm waiting.
Yeah, one last point on that really quick. It'd be interesting to see if Phil Spencer comes out and does a mic drop moment, kind of like Sony did to Microsoft back when they were both announced. However, Phil Spencer has mentioned numerous times that he's not into, fanboying things like that, or trying to embarrass the competitor in any form like that as well. But when Sony did that, it worked really well for a lot of people when they talked about backwards compatibility, or not backwards compatibility, the always on feature, when they and other features that Microsoft released with their Xbox One. So it'd be curious to see what's happening there.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess we'll see. That's part of the fun of E3, is seeing how this stuff unfolds. So the next conference in Sunday evening then is Bethesda. And Bethesda has been kind of killing it lately. I mean, they've got if you look at them as a overall publisher, you've had Prey, and you've had Dishonored 2, which won all sorts of awards. Obviously, you have Fallout and Elder Scrolls, which are the major IPs under Todd Howard's team. So the expectation out of Bethesda here is, again, no one really knows for sure what's coming, but the expectation is we may see Evil Within 2, which has been rumored for a while, and the new Wolfenstein game. And what that represents, we're not sure, but the most recent Wolfenstein, again, got rave reviews. It was really hailed as one of those great single-player first-person shooter stories. And one of the other major rumors for Bethesda, which they actually talked about last year as well, is Fallout 4 VR. So Fallout 4 was a major success for them. If it was coming to VR, that would be really interesting to see what platform in VR it came to, because that would be the definition of a system seller for that VR platform. And all we know is that in the past, or last year, I should say, they had a pretty cozy relationship with Microsoft. And it was the rumor right now is that we may see some form of Fallout 4 VR on Scorpio, with potentially any of the headsets Scorpio is going to support. So what are your thoughts here? Wolfenstein Evil Within. I know you were a big Evil Within fan, if I recall correctly. And what do you think?
Yeah, both of those games actually. Wolfenstein was my favorite shooter in current generation until games like Halo came out, Doom, and other stuff. If you haven't played Wolfenstein, it's actually great. The story's fun. The direction they've gone with a lot of the gun mechanics and some of the gore that exists in the game is really good. Yes, I also loved Evil Within. I even played the DLC that came out with it. It was a lot of fun. It was kind of the first side of the Resident Evil type games that we got to see with a different, darker take. And it still plays well. It definitely is not a second generation piece of software for either the PS4 or Xbox One, but it still plays really well. Something that I think could be coming from Bethesda is the Skyrim for the Switch. We talked about that a bit when the Switch was announced. They showed some, I guess, gameplay, but more of a trailer as to what could be on the Switch. So I think we could see a little bit more of that. I don't know if they're going to spend a little bit of that time when Nintendo is presenting their software coming up, despite Nintendo not really having a true E3, but I bet you we see some of that from them as well as Bethesda. But that could be a bit of a surprise from the VR standpoint if Microsoft has some exclusive stuff in Fallout, and to go VR with the new Scorpio, that could kind of go hand in hand with a pretty big announcement.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I'd actually forgotten about, Skyrim on the Switch. In fact, it was one of the games that was shown in that very first Switch commercial they did, right? So, be interesting to see if we get that. I would have to imagine at this point, since there's been no news, that would be something we'll see, as you said, in either their conference or Nintendo's kind of the direct thing they're doing. So interesting. After that, we move into Monday, and early Monday is Ubisoft. So Ubisoft, last year they had Watch Dogs 2 and another type. Thank you. For Honor earlier this year, yeah, which was actually apparently sold extremely well, as we've kind of touched on before, and I've posted some articles on the site about. But in an interesting kind of scenario here, Ubisoft has come out themselves over the past few weeks and kind of told us what we can expect from E3. So I don't know if they were just trying to get ahead of leaks or what, but essentially we know that we're going to get a look at Far Cry 5, The Crew 2, South Park, The Fractured Butthole, which is always fun to say, and Assassin's Creed Origins. So, those are 4 large IPs, and we now know, of course, that South Park is coming out October 17th, if I recall correctly. They just gave the release date last week, but we don't have any kind of hard details on the other 3 just yet. Far Cry, I'm a pretty big fan of. I 100% of Far Cry 4. I really enjoyed it. Primal, I only played briefly. There was really nothing wrong with it. I think I got distracted by other games again. But it'd be interesting to see what they do with Far Cry 5, to see if it's a new take or if they really try to expand that game a little bit, because I think it's gotten stale for some people. Same thing goes for Assassin's Creed. They took a year off and they kind of spent a lot more time, it seems, kind of trying to reinvent, or hopefully reinvent, what Assassin's Creed is. In terms of South Park, I know you love the Stick of Truth. I never personally played it, but you've been excited for the Fractured Butthole. So what are your thoughts on Ubisoft here?
Yeah, Fractured Butthole. I don't know how many times you can say that. But one of the things that's pretty funny is with South Park, I played it when it came out on 360, and I played it again when it came out on backwards compatibility for the Xbox One. And it's fantastic from the details that they spent with Trey Parker and Matt Stone with the characters from South Park. They're all there. I mean, and if you've watched throughout the seasons, what are they, season 18 now or something for that show? A lot of things that were at the beginning of the seasons were in that game. So I'm curious to see where they take the sequel to the game as far as story goes. They tend to be kind of original stories with clues of what happened in the past with him. So South Park looks really good. I was pretty sad when it got delayed again. Actually got delayed twice in the past 7 months. It was supposed to be out in fall of 2016. Then they pushed it to early 2017, and now it's all the way to the fall of 2017. So really sad to see that go. One thing that was interesting this week from the game sales charts, as far as the highest selling game for 2017 so far, was Ghost Recon. I didn't see that happening. I've kind of backed off some of the Ghost Recon stuff because they come out and they're so buggy. But I was surprised to see that it's selling so well above a whole bunch of other games that are bigger releases from a system standpoint that are more exclusives. So with this being kind of a cross-platform game, I can kind of see why it outsold things like maybe Horizon or Zelda on Nintendo. But it was a big surprise for me. So Ubi's doing really well, and I was actually glad that Assassin's Creed took a break this year because they've just haven't been the same. Even though Syndicate was one of my favorite Assassin's Creeds that has come out recently, it's just the way they did London was kind of mind blowing in the story. So with the new one coming, I can't wait to see more of it, the way it plays, the story behind it. The rumors are it's going to be in Egypt, but we'll see. And with Far Cry, I've kind of backed off that one as well. It just seems like a lot of the same stuff recycled. So I hope they bring something fresh to that franchise.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I saw the sales charts and Ghost Recon being the #1 selling game this year, I was kind of baffled. It's like, what? I don't, I don't understand how that happens. And then, last year, the Division was one of the top selling titles all year as well. It seems like Ubisoft has these massive hits, and for whatever reason, there's a percentage of the community that stops playing it or gets really angry about bugs or just issues with the game they don't care for. But for whatever reason, these games still sell and continue to sell. So we'll see. The one title we didn't touch on was The Crew 2. It's probably the smallest of the four in terms of audience. I think we both, if I recall correctly, tried The Crew when it first launched. Again, we're talking about the same thing. It seemed to have some bugs. It seemed to not be fully polished. And from what I hear from people, it became a much better game over time. But I never went back to it. And it'll be interesting to see, one, again, how it launches, The Crew 2. But if they bring any new features to that racing genre, Forza Motorsport is spectacular. Forza Horizon is almost off the charts at this point. Horizon 3 is probably the best open world racing game maybe ever at this point, especially with the Blizzard Mountain and Hot Wheels expansion now, which people are adoring. But I need to see what they can do with that game to really pull in car fans like we are. I mean, you and I are literally their key audience for a game like The Crew, and yet neither of us really spend any time on The Crew that I'm aware of. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, The Crew got a little silly for me in a number of areas when it came to the way you could mod the cars. Turning a sports car into an SUV and putting big wheels on it was kind of silly. But at the end of the day, the reason we didn't pick it up at the beginning was because of the bugs. Exactly what you mentioned with Ubisoft in general, as we've kind of seen games in the past. They launched, they're extremely buggy. I mean, the Division got a complete rework. But they sell like crazy, which is good at the end of the day because after they sell like crazy, you can find them really cheap used if you're looking to do that. Or they have really big sales new. I've seen numerous Assassin's Creeds that release in the fall, and by Christmas time, they're $40 on sale somewhere. So Ubisoft makes a lot of really good things. I wish they would polish their games a bit more instead of trying to meet a release date or a release schedule somewhere. With The Crew, I'll have to see more for that before I get way too excited. But a lot of people played it, and it still has a big following. So I think they're going to meet their numbers pretty easy there.
So then finishing up the major conferences on Monday evening is Sony. And Sony has a interesting reputation depending on who you speak to with their E3 conferences. So they, looking at 2016 in particular, they really came out and showed a lot of impressive trailers, which really got their fan base excited, and not just the people who only buy Sony consoles, but basically anyone who plays on a PlayStation at all. Really saw this kind of gorgeous future of what to expect on the PlayStation platform. And that included things like, Spider-Man and Detroit and Death Stranding and all these things. But, depending on who you speak to, like I said, it's also a little controversial because in the end, there really wasn't a lot of things shown that were releasing or had scheduled release dates. And, I think for some like myself, Death Stranding is a perfect example. It got a lot of press. We saw articles of it everywhere, and then we saw the trailer everywhere, and it's really intriguing and interesting. But they only announced, late last year that they had decided on an engine for that game. And that seems just kind of bizarre because what that means, of course, is that we can't expect to see that in production for years yet. But we kind of joke around among people that play the games that it could be 2019, even 2020 before we see the game in reality. So that's a little strange. But regardless, with Sony, we actually have a few release dates of games that are coming out later in the summer already. That includes the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, That license of Crash Bandicoot, surprisingly, is owned by Activision nowadays. But regardless, that's coming as a kind of complete remaster with new animations and 4K support on June 30th. And then we have Uncharted Lost Legacy, the kind of side adventure, if you will, to Uncharted 4. That's coming out on August 22nd at $39.99, and it's still supposed to be about a 10-hour campaign. So really looking forward to that one. And then finally, something I'm really excited for is the new Hot Shots Golf. So it's been renamed Everybody's Golf, similar to the Japanese version, and that has a release date of August 29th. So we know those things are already out there and coming. Bert, in terms of what we can expect to see from Sony at the E3 this year, they have a lot of things in development. What specific things are you expecting to see from them?
Yes, I'm pretty excited as well. And me being a big Naughty Dog fan, some of the stuff that you've mentioned already is pretty exciting already, especially with the Uncharted series being the biggest selling exclusive from Uncharted 4 and the Sony PS4 lineup as far as existing library games. So that's exciting. In one of my recent articles regarding exclusive, I did write a little bit about some of the games that we've heard a lot about, but at E3 and a lot of big trailers shown, but we don't see anything from development, and that's kind of got me intrigued as to what we may see this year. We saw God of War get some awesome footage, and that looks really fun. I think both of us are big God of War fans. We've played them. The problem with that one is the voice actor kind of leaked some information. That's not rumored to come out until 2018, so it's kind of unfortunate. I bet we'll see some more gameplay, though, and kind of more features that are expected from them. So I'm liking that a lot. Gran Turismo Sport has already had their beta come out, and that looks really cool from a graphics and gameplay standpoint. However, I'm kind of afraid it's going to come kind of light on content compared to Forza 7 that we're almost expecting to see at E3. However, it's the first Gran Turismo we're finally going to see on PS4. So I think we'll see some more gameplay. I bet they'll be showing some gameplay for the people that are there to actually get their hands on it outside of the beta. And then, a couple of years ago, we saw something about Shenmue finally coming. Is it Shenmue 3? As far as, is it going to be a full story? Is it going to come episodic? What are we kind of seeing? Where is it? We saw it, and we saw the crowdfunding behind it. We still haven't seen anything, and it was, showcased with Sony. A couple other ones that we've talked about in our articles that have literally seen almost nothing, but people are clamoring for more details and gameplay and something more than a screenshot, is the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, they have said that this is going to be episodic, but we are still looking for that to be hopefully in 2018. We have heard it's not coming in 2017, so that's kind of unfortunate. But once again, since it's been announced, we haven't heard anything about it. And with Kingdom Hearts 3, once again, very little gameplay that we've seen. Maybe a screenshot or two have come out in the past year, but still no firm due dates. One big thing that's been rumored for a long time and that both of us would probably get really excited about is Bloodborne 2. I'm interested to see if they're going to, soup up the way that looks in the gameplay, just because now we have the PS4 Pro, and we'll hopefully be getting some enhancements. And, man, that game would be amazing in 4K. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think Bloodborne 2 announcement would be that sort of, not even mic drop moment, but, something that the crowd would just go wild for. So I would love to see it. We know that From Software has said they're not making any more Souls games, at least, for the time being. So this is one that's kind of expected just because we know it was a hugely popular game. Rave reviews, sold well, almost called a, exclusive system seller. So we can hope. There's a few others, Days Gone is something they showed last year. That's expected to have a heavy presence, So that's from Ben Studio, the guys who did Uncharted Golden Abyss on the Vita and Siphon Filter. And then things like Detroit Become Human and Spider-Man. Spider-Man's a really popular game from last year. And with the movie coming this year, it wouldn't surprise me at all for that to have a big presence. Why can't I say presence today? Lastly, the biggest thing, I think on everyone, even bigger than Bloodborne 2, would be Last of Us 2. That was shown at PSX. It the crowd went kind of nuts. It was not expected. A huge announcement. One of my favorite games of all time. I think one of yours as well. So, hopefully we get a little more on that, because that's one I'm really, really looking forward to, probably more than almost any other game. So that kind of covers everything across the main conferences. So let me ask you this, Bert. If you look across these conferences, whether it's Sony or someone else, what do you think in terms of kind of a crazy prediction or something you think is unlikely but could happen? What do you think of anything we could see?
Yeah, so I'm going to go kind of out on a limb here and be kind of crazy, as you mentioned. I think we're going to get a tease of some sort from the Sony PS5. My main reason for thinking that is because I think with all the new hardware talk and other things that are happening, and with the PS4 Pro kind of releasing to a lukewarm sales figures, I think they're going to have to do something in order to get the audience kind of excited about what's coming from the future of Sony, despite them having a crazy lead in console sales. With the Scorpio being released this E3, I think they're going to try to take some steam from Scorpio and maybe show something like a 5 to 10 second, just tiny little light show up and PS5 light up towards the end of their conference, and that'll get them going. I think Last of Us 2 is going to be a big surprise as to what they might show, but when it kind of pales in comparison to what a console release would do, I think that will do something. I'd like to dream big and think there might be a Vita sequel or a Vita 2 or something. That's been rumored through some patents that have kind of come out in the recent patent office that's happening, but I don't know if Sony's going to take another risk with a Vita again, especially with the Switch out. How about you?
Yeah, you're swinging for the fences. So I think I think you're a little crazy. I don't think we'll see anything from Sony in terms of PS5. I think it's with the PS4 Pro and PSVR being new hardware last year. And then, like you said, they have a huge lead in sales right now, about 2-to-1 overall in the market compared to the Xbox One. I think that Sony's going to really double down. I think we'll probably see some big software for PSVR to try and give that another push. That seemed to come out of the gate hot, and then it's just really kind of died off. But I think with PS4 Pro, we'll see something where they kind of, take advantage of having the year-old hardware. And that sounds kind of weird, but what I mean by that is they'll most likely see a price drop. We might see a bundle. We might see some exclusive console design. So, imagine if they come out with something like a Spider-Man themed PS4 Pro. Collectors and comic book fans would be all over that. So I think that's what we'll see. I certainly don't think, I think it's far too early to see something like a PS5. In terms of a new Vita, well, I think I can speak for both of us that we both loved our Vita. Great piece of hardware. Just feel it didn't get the support that it should have, which is kind of a shame. But for big predictions, I think, one thing that I've been thinking about for a while, if you look at the timeline that Microsoft has had in terms of when Phil Spencer took over and they started this kind of reorg of the whole Xbox structure, if you will. I think that Microsoft is sitting on a lot of unique IPs that have been dormant for far too long. And I think it's about time we see one or some of those come back. Preferably, I would love to see Banjo 3. It's been 15 years or however long since we got Banjo-Tooie, and the fans of those 3D platformers like myself have been clamoring for that forever. So with Yooka-Laylee being a big hit and very popular, and Crash Bandicoot and Psychonauts 2 and all those kind of platformers coming back, I think that's a possibility. And then I also think they might do something with Joanna Dark. Perfect Dark was a big IP. It was a massive hit on the N64. They tried to bring it back when 360 launched with Perfect Dark Zero, and we all try to forget about that game because, quite frankly, it's not very good at all. Went back and played it recently, and it's almost unbearable. Please don't do that. It wasn't very good to begin with, and it's aged poorly. So that about tells you all you need to know. But I think Joanna Dark as a character is far too cool and has too much potential to just let that die off. I'd love to see something like a Tomb Raider like reboot of Perfect Dark with a large world, a cool sci-fi universe, and gadgets and all those things. So that's what I think. I don't know if it would be one of those two, but I think Microsoft is going to surprise us with a new IP in some form. All right, so one of the segments we're going to do on our podcast is where Bert and I each take a classic game that we loved and love to go back to or loved in our childhood, something that brings that feeling of nostalgia back, and just kind of bring it out, talk about it, why we loved it, and how it holds up today, if it does hold up today. So Bert, you want to go ahead and start with yours?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the Microsoft Xbox One, not the Xbox One console, but the original Xbox. And I'm going to talk about Jade Empire. Back in the glory days of BioWare and Microsoft's relationship, as you can see, the only on Xbox thing. This game was fantastic from an action RPG. At the time, BioWare had only done something simple as, not simple at all, but Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. And they were getting into the console area with this type of game. And Jade Empire just had an amazing story, had really cool gameplay for the time, and the game got rave reviews. So that's my game this year for this week, I should say, for Season Reflections.
Yeah, good pick, man. I love Jade Empire. I'm one of those people that have been kind of waiting for a follow-up to that game since it released. So it'd be awesome to see if that ever came back. For mine, I'm going back to the Sega Genesis and a game called King's Bounty. So I'm sure many people have never heard of this game, but it was one of my favorites as a kid. Really enjoyed playing it. I can still play it today and enjoy it, and it's kind of unique. Essentially, you kind of sail around this flat world map, and your goal is to recover this scepter, and you have to find it. What's really unique about this game is every time you start a new game, it's a randomly generated world, which was not too common back then, 20 plus years ago. So you would sail around to different parts of the land, and you would build up an army of knights and ghouls and wizards and things like that, and then you would kind of take over land and search for this scepter by piecing together a puzzle of the map, and you could eventually find it. And then, like I said, when you would if you would eventually find it, then you'd beat the game, which was pretty difficult. And even if you did that, if you wanted to play it again and try some different things, the world would completely reset. So really neat. You can still play it today. I don't think it's a game I'm aware of anyway that was ever kind of brought back on the newer systems. It may be part of that Sonic collection on the Xbox 360, but I honestly don't recall. But if you ever want to look that up, that was King's Bounty. So big favorite of mine. And so with that, I think we are done. Like I said, I really want to thank everyone for joining our debut episode here. This is something we're going to be putting together bi-weekly, so every other Sunday we'll be publishing this on our YouTube channel. You'll also be able to find us on iTunes and SoundCloud. We'll get those up as well. Please, 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 if you enjoy it, rate us, subscribe, and open to feedback. So if you'd like to provide feedback, if you'd like to ask any questions, we are going to be doing segments in the future where we kind of answer reader questions. Please let us know what you think.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention too, we do a lot of shorter videos as well that will cover certain topics or certain conversations that we've been having and we want to show and share with you guys. So on our current Facebook group, we're getting together with an Injustice 2 guild. So if you're playing Injustice and you're looking to join a guild, we have that up. Our guild ID number is A13DJ, and that's D as in dog, J. So join us. You can kind of unlock stuff together. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we're going to put that up on our site as well. So like we said, we're looking for members to join that guild. We've got some recent articles up that are pretty unique. So I believe, Bert, you posted your article on whether exclusives still matter to the consoles, and you did an excellent 11-minute video on that as well. And then I put an article up recently around 3D platformers, which we touched on today, and kind of their resurgence in the industry. So good stuff out there to check out. Like I said, if you enjoy our site, if you enjoy the podcast, please let us know. Take care, everyone.